the beatings of Jesus. Of course, Jesus was flogged. And if you've watched television shows that showed the Passion of Jesus, what's the Mel Gibson film? That was Passion of the Christ. Yeah, the Passion of the Christ. If you've seen that one, it shows and depicts the horrors of scourging or of flogging. So I was a little taken back, although I think I knew, I had read it, but not until preparing for this lesson did I actually think that Paul and Silas had received that level of abuse. This wasn't something that would have caused just, mild pain or a little bruising. This would have been a very brutal beating for them. So that kind of surprised me. And as you think about the day that they were thrown into prison and all the events as they built upon one another, it makes their time in the inner cell much more surprising. Because any one of the things that they experienced would have been, for me, a day ruiner. I mean, any of them would have been something that would have ruined my day or made it a terrible day in my mind. And so maybe we should stop and ask as a first question tonight, how would I respond to such a day? If I had been in the inner cell, would I be singing? Do you think you would? Do you think in the inner cell that you would have been singing hymns and worshiping God? Burst away, man. Go for it.
But I feel like there was a time in my life that I wouldn't have. I mean, I would have been brutal. I mean, very, very brutal and probably unorthodox, actually. But the more and more that I study Bible and stuff now, it would be easier now to be more humble and godlike or something like that.
I wonder if sometimes on a mission trip like this, if perhaps maybe our faith might run a little stronger or something, than in our daily life. I mean, if this happened to me in my daily life, I'm off my guard a little more. Right. But perhaps, if I was on doing as Paul, but still, I'm not trying to take away from what a bad day they had. Yeah, for sure. Yes.
When the jailer reported Paul's words, the chief magistrates have sent to release you, therefore come out now and go in peace. It's no wonder that Paul says, no indeed, we're not going to go in peace. They need to come and acknowledge and release us.
That's right, yeah. So Sam's referring to the rest of the story, so to speak, and that is that the jailer comes in after the earthquake and all the bars of the cells have come open, and the jailer's going to kill himself, and Paul says, no, we're all still here. And then he washes their wounds, baptizes his family, takes them home, takes care of them. But then the next day, I believe it's the next day, the very next day, the magistrates say, well, we're going to let you go. And Paul says, by no means. The magistrate is going to come and escort me out himself because Paul was a Roman citizen. And this is one of the occasions where he actually kind of expresses the fact that he is a Roman citizen, and to be treated in such a way without some kind of trial would have been something that could have gotten the magistrate in a lot of trouble. But yeah, that's right. That kind of shows just how much he was abused. Good. Anybody else have a thought? Yeah, Rick?
Keep from being beaten in Jerusalem. Why he didn't do that here is kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of interesting, isn't it? To think that maybe it was just happened so quickly, they were just kind of stripped, and the noise was so loud that there was not an opportunity. But it does kind of make you wonder why sometimes he calls on that privilege and sometimes he doesn't. Yeah.
Jewish law was that they were to be punished according to Jewish law, and That was to stone. That's when Paul was in Derbe and Lystra. Jewish law was what got him there. They stoned him and left him for dead.
Yeah.
Kind of a different story there.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the Jews would punish with a rod, but they would kill with stones. So that was a pretty intense persecution there as well. Yes. Good. Anybody else?
There's a picture, actually it's down the road at Lydia, Church of Lydia, of the punisher that accompanied the magistrate, sort of did his executioner, but
Okay.
also he served out the punishment that the magistrates would deal out after a trial. And they carried this Swiss Army knife of punishment. There were three things over their shoulder. It was an axe, a large broad axe that was used to behead people. That was the punishment. And then the flogging whip was wrapped around the handle of that so that you can unwrap that and take it off and use it individually. Or when we think about being beaten with rods, you might think about maybe getting a spanking with a cane pole or something like that. That's not what rods were. Rods were more like a baseball bat.
Really?
So they may have used the handle of this broad axe as the rod beatings. So there's a picture there in a couple of different places on some of the marble stones of this punisher carrying this thing, because you have to walk a long way with it, going from town to town behind the magistrate. So this is all in combination together in one thing that you can put over your shoulder and walk distance with. And it's pretty.
You know, it's interesting when you get the kind of the real picture, because when I think of rods, I think about like a cane pole almost, or yeah. So this would have been something that would have been deeply bruising and bone breaking potentially. Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. Barbara's asking about do the whip itself, like the leather, does it have pieces of bone and things sewn into it or a part of it? And I think history tells us that yes. I don't know that it always had to have it on there, but certainly those scourging whips would have pieces of bone and things sewn onto it or tied to it, so it would cause maximum injury. Yeah. Very interesting. Anybody else want to chime in here? So I'll go back to my question. Would you have been singing in there? Or maybe cursing? Hopefully not cursing. But certainly grumbling. And I don't want to be a grumbler, but I think it's something maybe all of us have to fight against a little bit. We just have to, because we just want to grumble all the time about everything. And so, especially if something this intense had happened to me, it would take a really different way of thinking to get me where I would be in that prison cell and be singing praises. And that's what I tried to bring to light in this morning's lesson. They would have to know and to understand that even in that dark moment, they were not abandoned by God. That God's presence was there, that He was pleased with them for enduring this suffering for Christ. Because they weren't suffering for something selfish or for something that they had done that was wrong. They were suffering simply because of their faith. So it makes me think and want to ask myself, why am I so easily a grumbler? Because I don't really want to be that way. And maybe a takeaway from tonight's class that we can all try to work on is just grumble less. And if we think about God's presence being with us, then hopefully that will lead us to grumble less, because it's a bad habit. So in this morning's lesson, I put forth to you 3 different ideas on cultivating this worshipful spirit. And one of the first things as we started tonight's class to realize is that it's not dependent on my circumstance. It's kind of like joy. You know, joy transcends the circumstance, and so does worship. Worship comes and is born out of my relationship with God and my adoration of Him, and being overwhelmed by Him and being in His presence and understanding who God is, more than it is about whether or not that particular day I feel like was a good day. Because when I've had a good day, then I'm more likely to worship. And when I've had a bad day, I'm more likely not to worship. And where I'd like to get in my life is to where I worship because I'm so amazed at God and who He is, that it doesn't matter what kind of day that I'm having. And so I used this morning's from Psalm 139, whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. And that's from the King James Version, Psalm 139, 7 through 10. So I want to ask a question then, maybe this will be a practical thing for us. How can we become more aware of God's presence? Because if that's an important part in cultivating a worshipful spirit, how can we be more aware of God in our daily life?
Just look around us.
Okay. As in
All the beauty that is created for us.
yeah. I want to share a little. There was a man who came to, he was interviewing for a hospital administrator job. It's maybe about 10 years ago. You remember when that man came here? He didn't get the job, but he came and interviewed. And so I drove him around town, and I was coming down Cottonwood Road from the north, coming down in toward town. You kind of crown that big hill there, and you can see out. And as we drove, which I do every single day, as I crowned that hill, he said, "Whoa, look at that." And he was looking off in the distance at all the hills that are in the valley looking towards the south, all down in Newton County and all around that you can see as you crown that hill. And that's something that I ignore every day. Every day. And so I think you're probably right, Lucille. I think it's just maybe training our eyes to see things that are there every day that we just kind of ignore or take for granted. And I don't know why sometimes I go other places to vacation when where I live is so amazing, People come here to vacation. Okay, so that's good. Anybody else have an idea on how we can kind of raise our awareness of the presence of God?
It starts in the morning when you wake up. We're so used to worrying about our jobs, packing our kids' lunches, things like that. The first thing you should do is just be aware of God every day.
So we might could say, Evan, it's like developing a habit of a pattern of acknowledging and noticing. If it starts in the morning, maybe it will continue throughout the day. It will continue throughout the day, yeah. And it helps to have a nice vista in Newton County like you have down there in Deer, right? That's pretty nice, too. Although we have some good ones here in town we ignore all the time, it seems like. Yeah, Barbara? I'm sorry, Barbara, I can't hear you.
I got out of the routine starting with devotion, so we run a daily reading from the Bible, work that way. I don't read the Old Testament, because the Psalms and the Proverbs and the New Testament.
I think what you're saying is good. So, Barbara.
I read another one that is kind of for children,
Mm-hmm.
and another
Okay. A pattern of beginning the day in devotion, Barbara was saying. She was explaining some of her routines that she's used in the morning. That'd be a beautiful way to get our mind upon the presence of God, is in the morning to get up and read the Bible, meditate, pray. Man, that would set us off in a good place. Not only would it kind of change our attitude for the day, but it would make us aware of God's presence. And maybe when we get to the stressful workplace, then we've set ourselves in a good heart place, recognizing God's presence. Very good. Anything else you could think of? Sam?
Wasn't it Elijah that before the presence of God in the storm, in the wind, the rain, and found him where?
Very good. The still, small voice. Yeah. Good. Barb?
Sometimes in our disappointments that we can not see it at the time, but maybe the next event down the road, we can see God through. We had a son that was taking a busload of kids. They stopped at a restaurant, got sorry service. It slowed them down 30 minutes. They get down the road, the next town, 30 minutes before they'd gone through, there was a tornado that had gone through. There was God in his presence taking care of them.
Okay. Yeah, well, that'll kind of put grumbling in its place a little bit, won't it?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And unfortunately, sometimes we see God's presence more clearly when we look back and see that he was there, then we're able to train ourselves to see it in the moment. And maybe that's why we need to try to do both. Good. Man, you guys are giving good stuff. Good job. I didn't think of some of these, so that's great. Anybody else have something? Consider how to bring ourselves into God's presence in our awareness more. Yes, ma'am.
I have 3 devotionals a day that pop up on my phone.
Good, okay. That's great. So,
It's a verse, and then a thought, and then the prayer.
okay.
And then, if I really am inspired by it, I send it to some friends.
Okay. So it pops up on their phone too, huh? That's good. Well, so what you're talking about then is if we set it as a phone reminder, then even when we tend to be forgetful about it, we're kind of brought back into this, oh yeah, God is here. Yeah. You know, I need to have that when I'm, that pop-up thing when I'm standing in line at Walmart. It pops up, you know, be patient and things of that nature. It would help me.
Believe me, sometimes it does.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
you're fixing to grumble.
It's
I've
true.
got the same download.
Good. It's good.
And sometimes when you're fixing to grumble, it'll pop up, just like
Yeah.
that, believe me.
You get rebuked is what you get, don't you? Yes. I would like to hear what you think about the story I relayed this morning about, we pronounce it Corrie ten Boom, but it's actually Bohm, but about her experiences in concentration camp. The quote that I used, one of the 2 quotes is this one: if you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. If you look at God, you'll be at rest. What did you think about her story? How many of you have seen that movie, The Hiding Place? Oh man, it's like, you guys need to watch it. It's really great. I mean, it's a little 1970-ish movie, kind of. But I think you would like it from the historical part of it, at least. And it's free, you know, on Netflix or whatever. You can find it. Amazing that the part of the story that touched me was their worship in the concentration camp hut or house that they lived in. That was very touching to me. To see all the women with lice in their hair and fleas in their beds, malnourished, in their own stench, miserable, overworked, in the fear of death at any moment, huddled around a small little light to read the Bible and sing together. Man, it really touched me. It's as I said, it's the way I want to be. I want to be, even in my misery, aware of God's presence and to understand God's nearness to me, even in bad moments. Yes, ma'am.
In the book, The Hiding Place, I believe it depicts her sister Bessie as the strong one. And Corey was more grumbling at that time. And then, Bessie would say, "Oh, I'm thankful for the fleas. It keeps the guards away from us." And so Bessie was always strong, and Corey learned that after Bessie was gone.
I'm glad you brought that up because it is in the movie. It is in the movie that Corey was really the struggling one, and her sister was the faithful one. But the way she watched her sister die then projected that spirit onto her, and she became that way. So it kind of is a kind of a way to honor her sister. Yeah, thank you. That's right. That's in the movie as well. That was a spoiler for everybody, so sorry. But yes, no, you're right. It's wonderful. Anybody else on this?
Steve, the image that you described of the women all being just in horrible condition, gathering together quietly to read, sing, pray, it struck me that they were together, and that there is a joy in being together. Even if it's under the threat of persecution, under the threat of having other bad things that could happen to them. And I don't think that there's any difference really between that and maybe you're saying this on purpose, but with Paul and Silas. Your original question was, how would we feel being in prison? Well, by ourselves, I think all of us would be like, yeah, I'd grumble, but what if you had your best Christian friend with you? You might be a lot more apt to try to give God glory, to try and find him at work in the situation in some way. Whereas, with a friend you would do that, whereas by yourself, maybe we wouldn't. So there's value in togetherness.
It's a really great point. Thank you. That's wonderful because, even Jesus, when he sent out the 70 or 72, when he sent them out, he sent them out in pairs, and he sent the apostles out in pairs. So there is something mutually strengthening and sharpening for two people to kind of be together. I hadn't thought of that. Would Silas have been that faithful by himself in the prison, or was it the fact that the two of them were together that they could say, come on, let's not be discouraged. We're serving God here, and kind of, talk themselves into a greater awareness of God's presence and to worship. That's a really good point. Real good. Anybody? Okay, so next I would like to talk about the word that is used in the Bible for worship under the title here of overwhelmed by God's majesty. Are you surprised that the Bible definition of worship is prostration? It's falling on your face. It's being face down. That really is the root meaning of the word worship in both the Old Testament Hebrew and also in the New Testament Greek. That is the definition. I would like to take you on a little bit of a journey here. If you have your Bibles, does anybody have a King James Version Bible I can borrow for a minute? Anybody? The King James Version Bible? Nobody? Is that King James? King James, I don't know if it'll do it or not. Okay, let's look in Matthew chapter 8, for example. Matthew chapter 8. This is going to be the New King James. It may not. Yep, it does. Good. Matthew chapter 8. So this is the event of the cleansing of the leper. And I want you to notice what the King James Version does that modern translations do not do. And we can explain why it does what it does. So in Matthew chapter 8, it says this. Now notice, when he had come down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him, and behold, a leper came. Now notice these words. A leper came and worshiped him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourselves to the priests, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Did you notice how it described the man's posture? It says in the King James Version, and I believe also in the Old American Standard Version, it says that he worshiped him. What does it mean? It means that the translators of the King James Version went back and grabbed that old meaning from Greek, which says that this word proskuo, or that Greek word, means to fall on your face, to worship, and that those were the same concept. Now, modern translators have used more of a broader interpretation of it to kind of describe the action, and that is, he fell on his knees, or he fell on his face. The word actually means towards the ground and to kiss. It means to kiss the ground. So it's to bow, it's to fall down before. So let's look, just because we're on the same idea, let's look in Matthew chapter 9. This is a description of Jairus coming and pleading for his daughter. Verse 18 of Matthew 9, again from the New King James Version, while he spoke these things to them, behold, a ruler came and worshipped him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And so Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. So here again is another example where the translators of the King James Version, the New King James Version, have used this Greek word, which means to bow down and to put your face to the ground, but uses the word worship. It gives you an idea of what it means to worship. It means that I have fallen before this deity, before the majesty of God. I'm completely overwhelmed by him. And it just can't help myself when I realize that it's the Son of God, that I fall before him in worship. And then if you'll turn back in Matthew chapter 2, this is the wise men who come and are before the Christ child, Jesus. In verse 9 of Matthew 2, when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them until it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. And notice this, they fell down and worshiped him. Now this time, the New King James decides to explain it out and to make it into a broader sentence. But it's the same idea here, that when they realized they were in the presence of the Son of God, or this Christ child, the one that they had followed the star to find, they fell down and they worshiped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So I really like this because I think it gives us a better flavor of what it means to worship. It's to understand the majesty of God, and when we do that, not only are we aware of its presence, but when we are aware of or overwhelmed by who he is, how great he is, how majestic he is, how awesome he is. That when we can grab a hold of that, it's going to make us worship, which means we're just going to prostrate ourselves before him because we're so overwhelmed by how great he is and how majestic that he is. The Hebrew word means to bow down or to fall down flat. It is a great picture of humility before God. So in my mind, it's significant that both the Hebrew word for worship and the New Testament Greek word for worship both point to this posture of bowing down. And as I said this morning, since we're in worship and when we come together to worship, we don't leave our seats, but our hearts better. Our hearts better leave their seats and be kneeling and falling down before God. That's what our hearts need to do, because that's the definition of worship. Any comments? Yes, sir.
In the closing weeks of my brother's life, when he was about to die from cancer, we would go over there, and my brothers and sisters and I would go over there and we'd talk to him. One time he talked about prostrating himself in his living room and praying, and he expressed an absolute closer feeling to God than he had ever felt before. Now, he's a praying guy. And it bothers me a little bit that we take prayer kind of lackadaisical sometimes. We're just sitting here. We don't, I mean, it's not easy to get down, but there's examples in the Bible of them. That may be something we need to practice. I'm not saying every time, but occasionally, maybe it is.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. But I think you're onto something important, that there's something really significant about that posture that is emptying of ourselves. Completely emptying and submissive. Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm proud that your brother expressed that to you. That's a neat memory.
For the last few years, most churches had places to meet. I don't know that that goes far enough, and that was the right purpose for it, but when you look back, that was common.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they were onto something. So ER said that in a lot of older churches, the pews had a kneeling bench or a kneeling thing there, and we kind of associated that with denominationalism in a sense. But I think by doing that, we may have robbed ourselves of something really special, in not having that. Mm-hmm.
Even the centurion, when Peter entered the house, the centurion was going to worship him, and he fell down
Mm-hmm.
to worship.
Yes, that's right. Yes, sir.
Steve, the problem's not our relationship to God. The problem's our relationship to ourselves. I'm sorry, that's where we are. And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about me.
Mm-hmm. Well, which really is a nice entrance to the last one, that's humility, right? I mean, that was the third point. These are humbling things we're talking about. Prostrating yourself, emptying yourself. It's a very personal, humbling thing. We won't do those things until we're humble. That's what you meant, right? Mm-hmm. I'd like to read this. This is from C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And this is about pride, since we've kind of transitioned into that, this humble and contrite heart. Any worshiper that worships is going to empty himself of pride. And so this is what C.S. Lewis says. The essential vice and the utmost evil is pride. Unchastity anger, greed, drunkenness, and all that are mere flea bites in comparison. It was through pride, even, that the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the complete anti-God state of mind. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation and every family since the world began. That's pretty strong. But if you think about it, it's right. It's the anti-God, anti-religion. It takes us from being reliant upon and submissive before God. Any other comments? We're going to have our prayer time now. Anybody? Thank you for your good thoughts.